Very few men have revolutionized the presidency as much as Theodore Roosevelt. He's truly an exceptional American, and he's in the top 3 of my favorite presidents of all time. Roosevelt's 7 years in office were an incredible whirlwind of progress, and to me, his personality embodies what the American spirit is all about. His political philosophies were shaped by his persona, and his persona was shaped by the life that he lived. As a very young boy, Theodore Roosevelt was a sickly child. Due to the numerous ailments he had, he couldn't play with the other children. Determined not to live a life of weakness, he was eager to grow strong and be adventurous. He became a boxer, a Greco-Roman wrestler, a swimmer. He trained his mind by reading and writing, and he became a big game hunter. And he hunted very big game. By a very young age, Theodore Roosevelt was elected to the New York legislature and became Undersecretary of the Navy. He resigned his position in the Navy and became a colonel of a volunteer regiment and a war hero during the Spanish-American War. After the war, he returned home, and his fame led him to be elected governor of New York, where he fought corruption and broke up political machines.
His reputation and actions earned him powerful enemies, even within his own party. Seeking to get him out of New York, Teddy Roosevelt's GOP enemies had him nominated vice president. He would run on the party ticket with William McKinley in 1900. Their goal was to send him to D.C. and make him insignificant and powerless. McKinley and Roosevelt won the election in 1900, making him the vice president. However, this plan backfires. In 1901, President McKinley is assassinated, making Teddy Roosevelt the 26th president of the United States. Hoping to end his reforms, Teddy Roosevelt's enemies have accidentally made him the most powerful man in America.
Teddy Roosevelt was truly the first modern president. He saw the president as a steward or servant of the people. He believed that government's role was to step in and protect the people's welfare when states could not. He used his bold exploits and robust personality to influence the media and lawmaking. To TR, the presidency was a bully pulpit, or a platform from which he could direct the laws of governing. TR saw the presidency as an elevated status above the other branches, with much more responsibility and much more leadership. TR enjoyed taking that leadership role. He was determined to take power from rich businessmen and redistribute it to the common American.
In Teddy Roosevelt's domestic agenda, he promised every American a square deal. And by square deal, he means everyone will have an equal shot to succeed in society. The first point of the square deal is trust busting. Roosevelt believed a powerful government was essential to a democracy, and regulation was the key tool to Roosevelt's politics.
Hey, you can't do that!
However, Roosevelt also felt that big business was essential to society, but corrupt and evil trusts have hurt the people, and as a steward to the people, the government needs to step in to protect the general welfare. Roosevelt used the Sherman Antitrust Act to sue 44 trusts in 7 years in office. Not all firms were killed. The good ones remained while the bad ones are done away with. Ultimately, the Sherman Antitrust Act promoted competition between these businesses. Due to his efforts, Teddy Roosevelt became known as a trust buster.
Roosevelt also tackled labor and regulation. Roosevelt's position on labor was defined by the 1902 Pennsylvania coal strike. Pennsylvania coal miners went on strike for better pay and better working conditions. And with the cold, brutal winter approaching, coal reserves in the United States began to run low, leaving many Americans fearful that they would freeze during the winter. With the citizens' welfare threatened, and as steward of the people, Roosevelt arbitrated an end to the strike.
Hey, you, get back to work!
Roosevelt set a precedent that future presidents of the United States could settle labor strikes when citizens were directly affected. The most recent example is when President Reagan broke up an airline strike during the holiday season in the 1980s. Roosevelt also empowered the Interstate Commerce Commission to strictly regulate abusive railroads.
Roosevelt also acted to guard consumer health. After reading The Jungle, Roosevelt used his persona to push for change. In 1906, Roosevelt signed the Meat Inspection Act, and this mandated strict cleanliness in meat plants and set up the meat inspection system.
Hey you, don't eat that meat!
Going after the substandard food and drug industry, Roosevelt signs the Pure Food and Drug Act in 1906. This act required truth in labeling and banned the sale of contaminated food and drugs. Both of these laws are still in act today.
And finally, one of the causes closest to Roosevelt's heart was nature conservation. After 100 years of Western migration, American resources were disappearing. Roosevelt saw the conservation of U.S. natural resources and forest land as a primary concern. Conservation is the preserving and protecting of wilderness areas and land. Advised by naturalist John Muir, Roosevelt set aside 148 million acres of natural forest land.
Keep your hands off those trees!
He created wildlife preserves and empowered the U.S. Forest Service to ban the sale of federal wilderness. Roosevelt also set up the U.S. Geological Survey to explore for resources. Today, Yosemite and Sequoia are two natural parks that can credit their preservation to Teddy Roosevelt.
Despite all of his successes, Roosevelt did fail in one area. This is in the area of civil rights. Like most progressives, Roosevelt was hesitant to promote rights for blacks. Instead of promoting them as a whole, he supported individual African Americans. Despite backlash, he appointed African Americans to federal positions in southern states. He also invited Booker T. Washington to dine at the White House. Booker T. Washington was a civil rights leader and was the first African American to be formally invited to the White House. Despite these efforts, his lack of full support led to a need for black self-representation. In 1909, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, or the NAACP, was formed and fought for nothing short of total equality of the races in American society.
It cannot be emphasized enough how much Theodore Roosevelt's presidency and his square deal changed American society. It set a precedent that powerful government should regulate business on behalf of the welfare of citizens. It expanded the power and role of the president forever in the lives of the public. It put a stop to abusive and negligent corporate practices and officially began to transition America out of the corruption of the Gilded Age. More than anything else, TR the man transformed the presidency. Never again after him would we see the presidency in the same light. The presidency after TR was forever an exalted office and initiated the pattern we see throughout the 20th century of the growth of power in the presidency itself.